When I was a public defender, I noticed a lot of things that disturbed me. I did the work. I came to do the work because I wanted to help poor people, and I thought helping poor people charged with crimes was the greatest calling. What I saw was unjust treatment of my clients. I saw, first of all, I only had African American clients. I think I may have had two white clients in all the years that I was a public defender.
Wow.
Whenever I saw white clients, I saw very different treatment. I particularly saw very different treatment of my Black clients when the alleged victims of their crimes were white, right? Those cases would be prosecuted more vigorously. There would not be good plea offers. So I saw a lot of injustices. But the one thing I saw that really fascinated me in a negative sense, or that I was stunned by, was the incredible power of prosecutors, the unchecked power of prosecutors, which is what led me to study that field.
A question I think that somebody in the audience could have hearing that is, well, did you just have Black clients because the crime rate is so much higher among African Americans? You have a great chapter on the book on that, but can you talk through that a bit? Because I think that it's important as we set the basis for this conversation to sort of set a framework around what are crime rates in the country. And so what might we expect in this position where we were just administering justice in a race-neutral way?
Right. So I think people see all these Black people being arrested, all these Black people in prisons, and they think, oh, that means Black people are committing all of the crimes. Well, actually, it's sort of a vicious cycle, and it's not quite that simple. If the only people who police officers are arresting, stopping, searching, and arresting are African American, then of course they're going to be the only people who are in the system and the only people who are ultimately imprisoned. And that's the problem. You know, it's not that whites don't commit crimes. Let's take the crime of drug possession, for example. All the statistics show that African Americans do not use drugs in any greater percentage than whites do. You know, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, other organizations that have all come to that conclusion. But because of the way that laws are enforced, and I focus on drugs for a reason, because the war on drugs caused our prisons and jails to be filled up. So drug offenses, both possession and other drug offenses, are responsible for filling up our prisons and jails to where they are today. But whites who use drugs, according to all of these organizations, in the same proportion as Blacks, are not arrested, they're not stopped, they are not pulled into the criminal justice system. So you have similarly situated people who are behaving the same way, doing the same acts, who are treated differently. And, that's, one of the biggest problems in our criminal justice system, the unwarranted racial disparities in our system. So I think, when people look at a lot of these statistics on the back end, they're reaching some unfair conclusion.
So I want to hold here for a second, because there's a really fascinating chapter in your book, I think by Mark Maurer, is that the way you say his name, about this. And so first I want to say I was arrested for drug possession when I was a kid. I had pot and nobody charged me with anything. There's a lot of privilege embedded in that story. A lot of people I've known as I've gotten older, not as much now, but when I was younger and was in college, used drugs, nothing happened to any of them. So first, certainly my experience is that there's a large amount of drug use among different populations. And what Maurer argues, as I understood it, and I'm curious if this accords with your experience, is that one of the things that happens is that particularly in these early, less serious crimes, right? Do you want to charge somebody for having pot, or do you want to charge somebody for having cocaine or having been drunk and disorderly, which I have certainly been when I was in college. I think I'm making myself sound cooler in college than I actually was, but I do it to make a point, which is there's a lot of discretion at that point in the system. And then later on, if you do something a little bit more serious, when the prosecutor or others in the system are deciding how to treat you, the question of a record becomes very important. Yes. And the question of how you are viewed at that earlier moment, whether you are viewed as somebody dangerous or a good kid just making a mistake, becomes very important. And that's where that seems to have in the literature a fair amount of effect on who ends up being charged with crimes and arrested for crimes and being seen as criminal later in life. Was that true when you were a public defender? Did you see that?
Absolutely. I mean, of course, we didn't see the people who weren't getting arrested. We
Right.
wouldn't see the college kids because they never got that far, the very point that you're making. And I think Mark makes an excellent point. Mark Maurer, the head of the Sentencing Project, who's done great work on this issue for so many years, is that when it comes to murder, if you murder someone, you get caught, whether you're black or white, rich or poor, most of the time, although there have been instances, and in my book, Arbitrary Justice, I talk about instances of a white college kid at Georgetown who actually murdered someone and didn't get indicted. But that rarely happens. Usually, the very serious crimes, prosecutors are going to charge you. But with the lower level crimes, and even some of the lower level crimes that carry a lot of time, like a lot of these drug offenses, particularly distribution cases, carry a lot of time, there's a huge amount of discretion. And so if you've got the college kid who most of the time isn't going to get arrested at all, by the way,
Yeah, I just was
usually,
really bad at this.
usually there's no arrest at all. But even if there is an arrest, and that's why I focus on prosecutors so much, the prosecutor has a tremendous amount of discretion. Prosecutors are the most powerful individuals in our criminal justice system because they decide not only what to charge, they can decide not to charge at all. They can decide to decline charges altogether. They decide what to charge the person with. For example, if you were caught with a certain amount of drugs, the prosecutor's got a lot of discretion. That prosecutor can charge you with possession, which is a misdemeanor that may carry less than a year in jail. Depending on the amount, she might charge you with possession with intent to distribute, which is a felony that if it's cocaine, for example, there's a mandatory minimum sentence, oftentimes a very long sentence at the end. Or the prosecutor can decide not to charge you at all. And that decision is made behind closed doors. There's no transparency. It's not in open court, and the prosecutor doesn't have to answer to anyone. So that's when those disparities start to take place, and that's what's so frightening about it to me, is that the most powerful decisions that prosecutors make, they make those decisions behind closed doors, and they're not accountable to anyone. I mean, theoretically, if they're elected, they're accountable to their constituents. But when prosecutors run for office, they don't talk about their charging policies and their plea bargaining policies, and no one knows. No one has the information to really be able to judge whether they're doing their jobs fairly. And so that's why I think we really need to focus more on prosecutors because, yes, police officers have a tremendous amount of discretion on the street, and that's so incredibly important. But police officers only have the power to bring people to the courthouse door. It is the prosecutor who decides whether they remain there and what happens to them after that.